Zara pressed herself against the cold metal wall of the corridor, her crystalline wings folded tight against her back. The transparent membranes caught the artificial light of the space station, casting rainbow patterns on the floor that would have been beautiful if anyone cared to notice. But beauty was the last thing on anyone's mind in the education sector of Kepler Station. The morning bell echoed through the hallways, and Zara's heart sank. Every day started the same way. Every single day for the past 3 months since her family had arrived at this human-built station. Her father worked in the botanical gardens, helping to maintain the vast hydroponic systems that fed the station's population of over 50,000 beings from dozens of different species. Her mother taught xenobiology to the younger students. They were respected, valued members of the community. Zara was just a target. Heavy footsteps thundered down the corridor, and she knew her tormentors were coming. The Korthak siblings always found her before first period. It had become a ritual, as regular as the station's artificial sunrise. "There she is," rumbled Thos, the larger of the two brothers. His rocky, granite-like skin scraped against the walls as he approached. The Korthak were silicon-based life forms, essentially living stones with crude intelligence. They stood nearly 8 feet tall and weighed close to half a ton each. "Our little butterfly," his brother Krex laughed, a sound like grinding boulders. "Ready for your morning adjustment, wing girl?" Zara had tried everything. She'd reported them to the station authorities, but the complaints always got buried in bureaucratic nonsense. The Korthak family had influence. Their father controlled one of the major mining operations that brought valuable minerals to the station. The teachers looked the other way, claiming that species integration required working through conflicts independently. She'd tried fighting back once. The medical bay had kept her sedated for 3 days, while they regrew the bones in her left arm. She'd tried hiding. But the station was only so big, and the Korthak brothers seemed to have an instinct for finding her. She'd tried reasoning with them. That had been the biggest mistake of all. It only made them angrier. "Please," Zara whispered, backing against the wall. "I haven't done anything to you. You exist," Thos said simply. "That's enough. You and your whole pretty little species. Thinking you're so special with your wings and your songs and your art. Making the rest of us look bad." The Korthak had no concept of beauty. Their world was harsh, utilitarian. They saw the aviary people's natural grace as an insult to their own crude existence. Where Zara's people had developed music, poetry, and aerial dances that could bring tears to observers' eyes, the Korthak had developed mining techniques and industrial processes. Both had their place in galactic civilization, but the brothers couldn't see it that way. "Hold her," Krex ordered. Thos's massive stone hands clamped down on Zara's shoulders, pinning her against the wall. She could feel her wing joints straining as he pressed her back. The other students in the hallway suddenly found very interesting things to look at on their personal displays. No one ever helped. No one ever intervened. Krex reached out with one finger, finding the delicate joint where Zara's left wing connected to her shoulder blade. Aviary wings were incredible things, hollow-boned like earth birds, but with crystal-like membranes that could shift from transparent to opaque, allowing for complex visual communications. They were also incredibly fragile. "Stop," Zara gasped, but she knew it was useless. Krex applied pressure. The joint bent backward, past its natural range of motion. There was a wet snapping sound, and Zara's scream echoed through the corridor. The wing hung limp, useless, sending waves of agony through her nervous system. "Oops," Krex said with mock concern. "Clumsy me," but he wasn't done. He moved to the right wing, and Zara's struggles became frantic. Flying wasn't just transportation for her people. It was expression, communication, joy. Taking away both wings was like cutting out a human's tongue and eyes combined. "Please. No, please." Snap. The second wing broke with the same sickening sound. Zara's legs gave out, and only Thos's grip kept her upright. Tears streamed down her face, but she bit her lip to keep from giving them the satisfaction of more screams. "See you tomorrow, wing girl," Thos rumbled, releasing her. Zara collapsed to the floor. Her broken wings spread around her like a discarded cape. The other students stepped carefully around her as they headed to class. No one stopped. No one offered help. This was normal now. But someone was watching. From the other end of the corridor, a figure in a faded black jumpsuit observed the scene with cold, calculating eyes. The human girl was unremarkable by most standards: average height, brown hair tied back in a practical ponytail, the kind of clothes that suggested a working-class family. She'd been on the station for only 2 weeks, and most people hadn't noticed her yet. Her name was Sarah Chen, and she was very, very angry. Sarah's family had come to Kepler Station because her father had been reassigned to work on the defense grid. Humans were relatively new to the galactic community. Having achieved faster-than-light travel only 50 years ago, they were still finding their place among the established species, still learning the unwritten rules of interstellar society. But Sarah had learned some rules of her own growing up in the rougher districts of Earth's colonies. She'd learned that bullies were the same everywhere, whether they were human gang members or silicon-based alien rocks. She'd learned that authority figures often couldn't or wouldn't help, and she'd learned that sometimes you had to solve problems with your fists. She watched the Korthak brothers lumber away, laughing about their morning's work. She watched the other students avoid looking at Zara's crumpled form. She watched a teacher, some slug-like species she didn't recognize, peek around a corner, see the situation, and quietly retreat. Sarah had been observing this pattern for 2 weeks now. Every morning, same time, same place. The brothers would find the winged girl and break her wings. The girl would struggle to the medical bay, where the automated systems would repair the damage with biofoam and regeneration fields. By afternoon, she'd be physically healed, but emotionally destroyed. By evening, she'd have retreated to her family's quarters. By morning, it would start all over again. The worst part was how systematic it was, how casual, how accepted. Sarah knelt beside Zara, who was trying to curl into a ball around her pain. Up close, she could see that the aviary girl was roughly her own age, maybe 16 or 17 in Earth years. Her species equivalent, anyway. The broken wings were already beginning to swell, the crystalline membranes clouding with internal fluids. "Hey," Sarah said quietly. "Can you walk?" Zara looked up with wide, golden eyes filled with tears. She'd never seen this human before. Most humans on the station were adults, working in various technical positions. The few human families usually kept their children in the human majority sectors. Yes, Zara whispered. "The medical bay. I know the way. I'll help you get there." Sarah slipped an arm under Zara's shoulders, helping her stand. The broken wings dragged behind them like damaged sails, but Sarah was careful not to touch them or cause additional pain. They made their way slowly down the corridor, past the staring aliens who suddenly found their personal displays fascinating again. The medical bay was efficient and sterile, staffed by automated systems that could handle most common injuries. The diagnostic scanner immediately identified the wing fractures and began preparing the regeneration chamber. Sarah helped Zara onto the treatment table and watched as the medical systems went to work. "Thank you," Zara said as the biofoam began numbing her pain. "You didn't have to." "Yeah, I did," Sarah said simply. They didn't talk much during the treatment. Sarah watched the medical displays, learning how aviary physiology worked, how their wings connected to their nervous systems, how much pain they were actually designed to handle. She filed away every detail. When the treatment was finished, Zara's wings were physically repaired but still tender. She moved them gingerly, testing the range of motion. "They'll do it again tomorrow," she said quietly. "They always do it again tomorrow." Sarah nodded. "I know. You should stay away from me. If they see you helping me, they'll hurt you too." Sarah's expression didn't change. "Maybe. They're very strong. Korthak have dense silicon-based bones, natural armor, incredible mass. A human couldn't." "I'm not planning to arm wrestle them," Sarah said. Something in her tone made Zara look at her more carefully. There was something cold in the human girl's eyes, something that suggested she'd seen violence before. More than that, she'd participated in it. "What's your name?" Zara asked. "Sarah. You?" "Zara. Nice to meet you, Zara." I'll see you tomorrow morning." Sarah left without another word, but Zara watched her go with a mixture of hope and terror. She'd seen enough documentaries about human behavior to know they could be unpredictable. Their species had a reputation for extreme reactions, for escalating conflicts, far beyond what other species considered reasonable. But she'd also been broken and abandoned every morning for 3 months. Maybe extreme was exactly what this situation needed. That evening, Sarah didn't return to her family's quarters immediately. Instead, she made her way to the station's industrial sections, where her father worked on the defense grid. She found him in the main control room, reviewing power distribution charts with 2 other technicians. "Dad," she said, "I need to ask you something." Michael Chen looked up from his work. He was a quiet man who'd spent most of his career on frontier stations, places where humans were still proving themselves to the galactic community. He'd taught his daughter to be respectful, to avoid causing trouble, to represent humanity well, but he'd also taught her to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. "What is it, sweetheart?" "The Korthak," Sarah said. "Tell me about their physiology. Their weaknesses." Her father frowned. "Why do you want to know that?" Sarah described what she'd been witnessing every morning. She watched her father's expression grow darker with each detail. The other technicians, a Centauri and a Rigelian, exchanged glances. "The administration knows about this?" Michael asked. "They know. They don't care. The Korthak family has too much influence." Michael Chen had been a soldier before he became an engineer. He'd fought in the resource wars on Mars, had seen what happened when good people stood by and let evil flourish. He'd hoped that joining galactic civilization would mean leaving that kind of brutality behind. He'd been wrong. "Korthak physiology," he said slowly, accessing his personal database, "is based on silicon matrices rather than carbon. High density, incredible compressive strength, natural armor plating. But they have weaknesses." Sarah listened carefully as her father explained the technical details. Korthak were nearly invulnerable to blunt force trauma, but their silicon-based structure made them vulnerable to specific types of stress. Their joints, where different mineral compositions met, were potential failure points. Their sensory organs were concentrated in their heads, with limited redundancy. Most importantly, their dense structure made them slow and relatively immobile. "Why are you asking me this?" Michael said when he finished. Sarah met his eyes. "Because tomorrow morning, those 2 bullies are going to learn that humans don't tolerate cruelty." Michael studied his daughter's face. He saw determination there, and anger, but also something that worried him. Sarah had always been protective of the weak, but this felt different, more personal. "Sarah," he said carefully, "humans are still new here. We're still proving that we deserve our place in galactic civilization. If you cause an incident, if I stop a daily assault that the authorities are ignoring, I think that proves exactly the kind of species we are." Sarah interrupted. The Rigelian technician, whose name was Vex, made a clicking sound that indicated amusement. "The young human speaks wisdom," he said in accented standard. "The Korthak have grown too comfortable with their impunity. Perhaps it is time someone reminded them that strength comes in many forms." Michael sighed. He could see that Sarah had already made up her mind. And if he was honest with himself, the situation she'd described made him angry too. The idea that some alien bullies were torturing a child every morning while the adults looked the other way violated everything he believed in. "If you're going to do this," he said finally, "you need to be smart about it. The Korthak are dangerous, but they're not invincible. And you'll only get one chance to surprise them." Sarah smiled for the first time in days. "Tell me everything." They spent the next 2 hours going over technical specifications, structural analysis, and tactical possibilities. Michael accessed restricted files from the defense grid, pulling up detailed scans of Korthak anatomy. Vex contributed observations from his time working with Korthak miners. The Centauri, who had remained silent, finally spoke up with information about station security protocols. By the time they finished, Sarah had a plan. It was dangerous, probably illegal, and definitely would cause an incident. But it would also put an end to Zara's daily torment. She returned to her quarters that night and spent an hour modifying her clothing and equipment. Her father had given her access to some of the tools used for maintenance work on the defense grid. Nothing that could be classified as a weapon, but items that could serve multiple purposes in the right hands. As she prepared for sleep, Sarah thought about what she was planning to do. In human space, her actions would be considered justified, protecting an innocent from repeated assault. But this wasn't human space. This was a galactic community, with different laws, different customs, different expectations. She didn't care. Humans had earned their place among the stars by refusing to compromise on their principles. Sometimes that meant standing up to bullies, even when those bullies were 8-foot-tall living rocks with political connections. Tomorrow morning, the Korthak brothers would learn that some humans bite back, and the galaxy would learn why humanity had survived long enough to reach the stars in the first place. The station's artificial dawn cycle began at 0700 hours, painting the corridors in soft yellow light that gradually intensified to simulate natural sunlight. Sarah had been awake for 2 hours already, running through her plan one final time while completing her morning exercises. She'd positioned herself in a maintenance alcove 30 meters from Zara's usual position, close enough to intervene but far enough away to avoid detection. The modified tools from her father's workshop hung from her belt, a plasma cutter disguised as a standard multi-tool, a gravitational field generator small enough to fit in her palm, and several other items that would look innocuous to casual observation. The corridor began filling with students heading to their first period classes. Sarah watched through the alcove's grating as various species moved past Centauri with their blue-tinted skin and elaborate head crests, insectoid Mantari clicking their way along the walls, a group of gaseous nebulans floating in their environmental suits. Then she saw Zara. The aviary girl moved carefully down the hallway, her newly regenerated wings held close to her body. She looked around nervously, clearly hoping to reach her classroom before the Korthak brothers found her. But Sarah could already hear the heavy footsteps approaching from the other direction. Right on schedule, Thos and Krex rounded the corner like two walking boulders, their massive forms taking up most of the corridor's width. Other students immediately pressed against the walls to let them pass, avoiding eye contact. The brothers scanned the hallway until they spotted their target. "There's our little butterfly," Thos rumbled, his voice carrying clearly through the thin station atmosphere. Zara froze. Sarah could see her calculating distances, looking for escape routes. But there were none. The corridor was too narrow. The brothers too fast despite their bulk. She pressed herself against the wall in exactly the same spot as yesterday, wings trembling. "Morning, wing girl," Krex said, cracking his knuckles with sounds like breaking concrete. "Ready for your daily reminder of your place in the universe?" Sarah stepped out of the alcove. "Actually," she said in a conversational tone, "I think she's had enough reminders." The entire corridor went silent. Students stopped moving. Teachers froze in doorways. Even the ambient station hum seemed to quiet. A young human female, was interrupting the Korthak brothers' daily ritual. Thos turned slowly, his massive head rotating like a gun turret. "What did you say, soft skin?" Sarah walked calmly down the center of the corridor, her hands relaxed at her sides. She'd learned a long time ago that projecting confidence was half the battle, especially when facing opponents who had every physical advantage. "I said she's had enough," Sarah repeated. "Find someone else to pick on." Krex laughed, the sound echoing off the metal walls. "Do you have any idea what you're dealing with, little human? We could crush you like an insect." "Maybe," Sarah acknowledged, "but you'd have to catch me first." The brothers exchanged glances. They were used to immediate submission from their victims. This human's calm defiance was unexpected. "Walk away," Thos warned. "This doesn't concern your species. It concerns me," Sarah said simply. She continued walking until she was standing between the brothers and Zara. The size difference was comical. Sarah barely reached their chests, and her entire body mass was probably less than one of their arms. But she stood firm, meeting their rock-hard stares without flinching. "Last warning, soft skin," Krex growled. "Move, or we'll move you." Sarah smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "You know what I learned about your species yesterday?" she said conversationally. "You're really strong. Incredible compressive strength, natural armor, dense silicon-based bones. Very impressive." The brothers looked puzzled by her casual tone. But you know what else I learned? Sarah continued. You're slow. Really, really slow. And your joints, where the different mineral compositions meet, they're vulnerable to specific types of stress. Krex took a menacing step forward. What are you talking about, human? Sarah's hand moved to her belt with practiced ease. The plasma cutter looked like a standard maintenance tool, but her father had made some modifications. Instead of a steady cutting beam, it now produced short, intense pulses perfect for creating thermal stress in silicon-based structures. I'm talking about applied physics, Sarah said, and fired. The plasma pulse struck Krex's left knee joint, the point where his upper and lower leg segments connected. The intense heat created rapid thermal expansion in the silicon matrix, while the sudden cooling afterward caused equally rapid contraction. The joint cracked with a sound like a gunshot. Krex roared in pain and surprise, stumbling backward. His leg could still support his weight, but the joint was damaged. His movement compromised. Thos reacted with typical Korthak directness, charging forward with both massive fists raised. But Sarah was already moving, diving to the side as his punch demolished the section of wall where she'd been standing. The gravitational field generator in her other hand activated, creating a localized gravity well that caught Thos's extended arm and pulled him off balance. Sarah rolled under his falling form and came up behind him, the plasma cutter already recharged. She targeted his right ankle joint and fired again. Another crack, another roar of pain. Impossible, Krex snarled, trying to advance on his damaged leg. Humans are weak, soft. You can't. We're squishy, Sarah agreed, dodging his wild swing. But we're also problem solvers. And you two? You're a problem that needs solving. She fired again, this time targeting the joint where Krex's arm connected to his shoulder. The silicon matrix cracked, and his entire right arm went limp. But the shot had used up most of her plasma cutter's charge, and Thos was recovering from his fall. The massive Korthak pushed himself upright, his damaged ankle grinding but still functional. He was angry now, really angry, and Sarah could see the murderous intent in his small, coal-black eyes. I'm going to tear you apart, soft skin, he rumbled, piece by piece. You're going to try, Sarah acknowledged. She reached into her pocket and pulled out what looked like a handful of small metal spheres. Thos lunged forward, his good arm reaching for her throat. Sarah threw the spheres at his feet and activated the final device on her belt. The spheres were actually microgravity bombs, designed for clearing debris in zero-G environments. When they exploded in sequence, they created a chaotic gravitational field that sent Thos spinning through the air like a leaf in a hurricane. His massive body crashed into the corridor wall with a thunderous impact that shook the entire section. But Krex was still mobile, even with his damaged joints. He came at Sarah from behind, moving faster than she'd expected despite his injuries, his good arm wrapped around her waist, lifting her off the ground. Got you now, soft skin, he snarled. Sarah had been expecting this. Humans were grappling specialists. Their ancestors had evolved to wrestle with predators many times their size. She went limp for a moment, making Krex think he'd won, then suddenly twisted and drove her elbow into the joint, where his arm connected to his torso. The plasma cutter had weakened the silicon matrix there, and her strike hit the exact stress point. The joint cracked further, and Krex's grip loosened. Sarah slipped free and immediately targeted his other knee with her remaining plasma charge. Crack. Krex collapsed, both legs now too damaged to support his weight. He tried to push himself up with his remaining good arm, but Sarah was already moving again. She pulled out a small device that looked like a standard scanner but had been modified by her father into something much more dangerous. This is a resonance generator, she explained casually, as if she were giving a lecture. It produces harmonic frequencies that can shatter silicon-based structures. I've tuned it specifically to Korthak physiology. She activated the device and pointed it at Krex's head. The effect was immediate and devastating. The harmonic frequency resonated through his skull, creating stress fractures in his cranial structure. Krex screamed and clutched his head, his small brain rattled by the vibrations. Stop, he gasped. Please stop. Sarah turned the device off. Will you leave Zara alone? Yes. Yes. Anything. Just don't. Will you stop bullying other students? Yes. Will you tell everyone that humans are not to be trifled with? Krex nodded frantically, still holding his cracked skull. Sarah turned to check on Thos, who was struggling to extract himself from the hole he'd made in the wall. His ankle was clearly broken, and he was having trouble supporting his massive weight. What about you, big guy? Sarah called out. Are we understanding each other? Thos glared at her with pure hatred, but he could see what she'd done to his brother. And he could see that she still had weapons he didn't understand. This isn't over, human, he growled. Oh, I think it is, Sarah said cheerfully. Because if I see either of you near Zara again, if I even hear that you've looked at her wrong, I'll come back with bigger toys. She pulled out her personal communicator and showed them the display. I've been recording this entire encounter. Would you like me to send the footage to station security? Or maybe to your father's business partners? I bet they'd love to see how his sons handle themselves in a fair fight. The brothers' expressions changed from anger to fear. Being humiliated by a human was bad enough, but having it documented and distributed would destroy their family's reputation. In Korthak society, strength was everything. Weakness was inexcusable. Delete that, Thos demanded. I'll consider it, Sarah said. After you've had time to think about your life choices. Let's say, a month of good behavior. No bullying anyone. Not just Zara. If I hear about you causing trouble for any student, this footage goes viral across the entire galactic network. She looked around the corridor, taking in the crowd of students and teachers who had gathered to watch the confrontation. Most were staring at her with expressions ranging from shock to awe to terror. Anyone else have a problem with that arrangement? She asked loudly. Silence. Good. Sarah turned to Zara, who was pressed against the wall, watching everything with wide eyes. You okay? Zara nodded mutely. She couldn't quite process what she'd just witnessed. A single human girl had defeated 2 adult Korthak in combat, using tools she didn't recognize and tactics she didn't understand. It went against everything she knew about the power dynamics of the station. They won't bother you anymore, Sarah said gently. And if anyone else tries to, you let me know. Humans don't like bullies. She gathered up her equipment and walked calmly away, leaving behind 2 crippled Korthak and a corridor full of stunned witnesses. The aftermath was immediate and chaotic. Station security arrived within minutes, but by then the story was already spreading through the student population. A human had defeated the Korthak brothers. Not just defeated, humiliated them. The footage from Sarah's communicator was already being shared through back channels, despite her threat to keep it private. The security chief, a professional centauri named Vextar, surveyed the scene with practiced eyes. 2 Korthak with multiple joint fractures, a damaged corridor wall, and about 50 witnesses, all telling the same impossible story. Where's the human now? He asked. Went to her first period class, said a Mantari student. Said she had a test she couldn't miss. Vextar's head crest fluttered with what might have been amusement. Of course she did. He'd been dealing with the Korthak family's influence for years, watching them cover up their son's behavior while station administration turned a blind eye. Part of him was impressed that someone had finally stood up to them. The fact that it was a human, a member of the newest species in the galactic community, made it even more significant. But it also made it more complicated. Within an hour, the story had reached the station's administrative level. Director Malthus, a pompous Rigelian who owed his position more to political connections than competence, was in full panic mode. The Korthak family was already demanding justice for the unprovoked assault on their sons. They wanted the human girl arrested, expelled, possibly even deported. They also wanted the footage suppressed, which told Vextar everything he needed to know about how accurate the witnesses' accounts were. The security chief found himself in an interesting position. He could arrest Sarah Chen for assault. The evidence was clear that she had initiated physical violence. But he could also arrest the Korthak brothers for the months of documented abuse they had inflicted on other students. Or he could do what station security had been doing for months. Nothing. Sarah, meanwhile, was sitting calmly in her xenobiology class, taking notes on comparative respiratory systems. Her teacher, Dr. Kessler, was a middle-aged human who had been watching his student with growing concern all morning. "Miss Chen," he said quietly during a break, "might I have a word?" They stepped into the hallway, where the damaged wall section was still being repaired by maintenance drones. "I heard about what happened this morning," Dr. Kessler said carefully. "Did you?" Sarah replied neutrally. "The entire station has heard about it. The question is, did you really do what they're saying you did?" Sarah met his eyes. "What exactly are they saying I did?" "That you single-handedly defeated 2 adult Korthak in combat, using modified maintenance tools and superior tactical knowledge." "That sounds about right." Dr. Kessler stared at her. "Sarah, you could be in serious trouble. The Korthak family has significant influence. They're demanding your arrest." "Right. Let them demand," Sarah said calmly. "They've been torturing that aviary girl every day for months. Where was their influence when she needed protection? That's not how the system works here. There are proper channels, procedures." "The proper channels failed," Sarah interrupted. "The procedures failed. Sometimes you have to solve problems directly." Dr. Kessler recognized the tone. He'd grown up on Earth's frontier colonies too. Had seen what happened when civilization's rules broke down, and people had to rely on themselves. Sarah was exhibiting classic human problem-solving behavior. When the system failed to protect the innocent, you bypassed the system. "You realize this could have galactic implications?" he said. "Humans are still establishing their reputation in the wider community. Actions like this could affect how other species view us." Sarah nodded. "Good. Let them see that humans protect those who can't protect themselves. Let them see that we don't tolerate cruelty, no matter who's perpetrating it or what their political connections are. And if they decide humans are too dangerous to associate with," Sarah smiled coldly, "then they weren't worthy allies anyway." The conversation was interrupted by the approach of Security Chief Vextar and 2 junior officers. Sarah saw them coming but didn't run or try to hide. She stood calmly, hands visible, waiting to see what they would do. "Miss Chen," Vextar said formally, "I need you to come with us to answer some questions about this morning's incident." "Of course," Sarah replied. "Am I under arrest?" "That depends on your answers," the security chief said. But his tone was neutral, professional, rather than hostile. As they walked toward the security office, Vextar studied the human girl. She was young, obviously not fully grown, yet she demonstrated tactical knowledge and weapons skills that impressed even him. Her calm demeanor suggested this wasn't her first violent encounter. "Tell me," he said quietly, "did your father teach you those techniques?" Sarah glanced at him. "Among other things, he was a soldier?" "Resource wars, Mars and the Belt." Vextar's crest fluttered again. The resource wars were legendary among galactic military historians. Humans had fought them with a combination of technological innovation and savage determination that had impressed even veteran species. If this girl was the daughter of a resource wars veteran, her capabilities made more sense. They reached the security office, where Sarah was led to a comfortable interview room rather than a detention cell. Vextar activated the recording system and began the formal questioning. "State your name and residential status." "Sarah Chen, dependent resident, quarters 7 Alpha 23. "Describe the events of this morning beginning at 0700 hours. Sarah gave a clear, concise account of the morning's events. She admitted to modifying maintenance tools, acknowledged initiating physical violence, and provided tactical details that made the security chief's eyes widen. She also presented evidence of the Korthak brothers' pattern of abuse, including medical records she'd obtained showing Zara's daily injuries and subsequent treatments. "Why didn't you report this pattern of abuse through proper channels?" Vextar asked. "Because proper channels had failed," Sarah replied. "The administration was aware of the situation and chose to ignore it. What gave you the right to take matters into your own hands?" Sarah leaned back in her chair, studying the Centauri's expression. "What gave them the right to torture an innocent person every day? When the system fails to protect the weak, individuals have to step up. That's not how civilized society functions, Miss Chen, isn't it?" Sarah countered. "When criminals know the law won't touch them, when victims have no recourse, when authorities look the other way, At what point does civilized society become complicit in the crimes it refuses to stop? Vextar found himself without a ready answer. The human's logic was uncomfortably sound. The interview continued for 2 hours, covering every detail of the morning's events. Sarah answered honestly, holding nothing back. She clearly understood the potential consequences of her actions but showed no regret. Finally, Vextar set down his datapad and looked at her directly. "Off the record," he said. "That was the most impressive display of tactical planning I've seen from someone your age. Where did you learn to fight like that?" Sarah smiled slightly. "Humans have been fighting for a very long time, Chief. We've gotten good at it." The news spread through Kepler Station like wildfire through a dry forest. By the end of the first day, every resident knew about the human girl who had single-handedly defeated the Korthak brothers. By the end of the week, the story had reached 3 neighboring star systems. By the end of the month, it was being discussed in the halls of the Galactic Council on Proxima Prime. Sarah sat in Director Malthus's office, flanked by her father and the station's legal advocate. While various officials debated her fate, the room was crowded with representatives from different species, each with their own perspective on what had transpired. "The young human's actions were completely uncivilized," declared Ambassador Torvak, speaking for the Korthak delegation. His rocky features were set in an expression of righteous indignation. "She attacked 2 innocent students, without provocation, using illegal weapons modifications. This cannot be tolerated." "Innocent?" Dr. Yilan of the Aviary Council's voice rose to an incredulous trill. "Your innocent students had been systematically torturing one of our children for months. Where was your concern for civilization then?" Michael Chen watched the argument with growing frustration. As the only human adult present with relevant experience, he'd been asked to provide context for his daughter's actions, but the political maneuvering was making his head spin. "The issue," Director Malthus interjected in his pompous Rigelian accent, "is not whether the Korthak brothers were behaving badly. The issue is that Miss Chen took the law into her own hands, using violence to resolve a dispute that should have been handled through proper channels." "What proper channels?" Sarah spoke for the first time in an hour, her voice cutting through the political rhetoric. "I documented 3 months of daily assaults. I recorded the medical treatment logs. I even submitted formal complaints to station security. Nothing was done." She stood up, ignoring the frowns from the various officials. "So let me ask you something, Director. If your child was being tortured every morning while you watched helplessly, how long would you wait for proper channels to work?" Malthus's colorless features flushed slightly. "That's not the point." "That's exactly the point," Michael Chen interrupted, his patience finally exhausted. "You want to punish my daughter for doing your job, for protecting someone when the system failed to protect them." The argument might have continued indefinitely, but they were interrupted by an unexpected arrival. Security Chief Vextar entered the room, followed by a figure that made everyone fall silent. Fleet Admiral Keshtar was a legend among the galactic military. The old Centauri had fought in the border wars, the hegemony conflicts, and dozens of smaller engagements. His head crest bore the scars of combat, and his uniform carried honors from 6 species. He was also the highest-ranking military officer in this sector of space. "Admiral," Director Malthus stammered. "We weren't expecting." "I came as soon as I heard," Keshtar said, his voice carrying the authority of absolute command. "I wanted to meet the young human who's been causing such a stir." All eyes turned to Sarah, who had stood when the Admiral entered but otherwise showed no sign of intimidation. She met his gaze steadily. Soldier to soldier. "Miss Chen," the Admiral said formally, "I've read Security Chief Vextar's report of your actions. I've also reviewed the tactical analysis of your engagement with the Korthak subjects. I have questions." "Yes, sir." "You modified standard maintenance tools into combat-effective weapons. Where did you learn those techniques?" "My father taught me basic engineering. The modifications were my own design, based on analysis of Korthak physiology. You demonstrated knowledge of harmonic resonance effects on silicon-based structures. That's graduate-level xenobiology. I'm good at research, sir." The Admiral's crest fluttered with what might have been amusement. You planned and executed a tactical operation that neutralized 2 opponents, each possessing a 10-to-1 mass advantage. You did this while minimizing collateral damage and avoiding civilian casualties. You also ensured your actions were recorded for legal and political purposes. Sarah said nothing, waiting for the actual question. How old are you, Miss Chen? 16 standard years, sir. The room fell silent. Everyone knew her age, of course. But hearing it stated so clearly in the context of her achievements was sobering. I see, the Admiral said thoughtfully. And tell me, do you regret your actions? Sarah considered the question seriously. I regret that it was necessary, sir. I don't regret doing it. Admiral Keshtar nodded slowly. He turned to address the room at large. Ladies, gentlemen, and honored beings, he began formally. I've spent 40 years in galactic military service. I've worked with soldiers from dozens of species, faced enemies that would give you nightmares, and seen conflicts that shape the fate of entire worlds. He paused, letting his words sink in. What this young human accomplished was tactically brilliant, morally justified, and strategically sound. She identified a problem that authorities had failed to address. She gathered intelligence on her opponents. She planned an operation that achieved maximum effect with minimal resources. She executed that operation flawlessly, despite overwhelming physical disadvantages. And she documented everything for accountability. Ambassador Torvak started to object, but the Admiral silenced him with a gesture. Furthermore, Keshtar continued, her actions have revealed a critical flaw in station security protocols. The fact that 2 juveniles could systematically assault another student for months without intervention represents a failure of command that goes all the way to the top. Director Malthus paled. Admiral, surely you're not suggesting— I'm not suggesting anything, the Admiral said coldly. I'm stating facts. This station's administration allowed a pattern of criminal behavior to continue unchecked. When a 16-year-old human girl had to resolve the situation herself, you tried to punish her for your failures. He turned back to Sarah. Miss Chen, I'm offering you a position in the Galactic Defense Academy. Full scholarship, fast-track officer training, guaranteed placement upon graduation. Interested? The offer stunned everyone in the room. The Defense Academy only accepted the best candidates from across known space. Most species considered acceptance a tremendous honor for their most promising young people. Sarah looked at her father, who nodded encouragingly. Thank you, sir, she said. But I'd like to finish my education here first. I have responsibilities. Responsibilities? There are other students being bullied. Other situations that need attention. I'd like to make sure they're resolved before I move on. The Admiral's crest rose in genuine surprise. Most young beings would jump at the chance for immediate advancement. This human was turning down a prestigious opportunity because she felt obligated to protect others. I see, he said. Very well. The offer stands open. When you're ready. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. Director Malthus, he said without turning around. I'll be conducting a full review of station security protocols. I suggest you use the time to consider whether your current approach to law enforcement is adequate. After the Admiral left, the political arguments resumed, but with less heat. Ambassador Torvak still demanded punishment for Sarah, but his position had been significantly weakened. Dr. Yelan praised the human girl's courage and called for the Korthak brothers to be expelled. In the end, a compromise was reached. Sarah would receive a formal reprimand for taking matters into her own hands, but no criminal charges would be filed. The Korthak brothers would be transferred to a different educational facility, ostensibly for their own protection. New anti-bullying protocols would be implemented station-wide. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was better than the status quo. 3 weeks later, Sarah found herself in the station's botanical gardens, helping Zara's father with the hydroponic systems. It had become a regular routine. She would spend her free time learning about xenobotany, while Zara worked on her art projects nearby. The aviary girl had changed dramatically since the confrontation. She still moved carefully, still startled at loud noises, but she was beginning to show signs of her species' natural grace. Her wings had regained their full range of motion, and she'd even begun flying again short flights through the garden's upper canopies. "Sarah," Zara called out, gliding down from a flowering tree. "I finished the piece I was working on. Would you like to see it?" The artwork was a crystalline sculpture that caught and refracted light in complex patterns. As Zara manipulated her wings, the light patterns shifted and changed, creating a three-dimensional story of the confrontation in the corridor. Sarah could see herself represented as a small but brilliant point of light, driving away much larger dark shapes. "It's beautiful," Sarah said honestly. "But you made me look too heroic." Did I?" Zara tilted her head in the way aviary people did when they were confused. "You saved my life, Sarah. How is that not heroic?" "Heroic. Heroic." Sarah had been struggling with this question for weeks. The attention her actions had generated made her uncomfortable. Students who had never spoken to her before now approached with nervous respect. Teachers went out of their way to praise her courage. She'd even received messages from young beings on other stations, asking for advice about their own bullying situations. "I just did what needed to be done," she said. "Anyone would have." "No," Zara interrupted firmly. "Anyone could have. But you did. That's what makes you special." They were interrupted by the arrival of another student, a young Mantari named Click Click Vess, who was in Sarah's xenobiology class. The insectoid being moved nervously, his mandibles clicking in agitation. "Sarah," he chittered in accented standard. "I need to speak with you about a problem." Sarah sighed inwardly. This had become common since the Korthak incident. Students who were being bullied, discriminated against, or mistreated in various ways sought her out for help. She'd become an unofficial protector for the station's vulnerable populations. "What kind of problem?" she asked. Click Click Vess explained that a group of older students had been stealing his research projects, claiming the work as their own. His species' academic traditions meant he couldn't challenge them directly without losing social standing. The teachers either didn't know or didn't care about the cultural complexities involved. It was exactly the kind of systemic injustice that Sarah had come to recognize and hate. "I'll look into it," she promised. After the Mantari left, Zara studied Sarah's expression. "You're going to help him, aren't you?" "Probably, even though it might get you in trouble again?" Sarah shrugged. "Someone has to. Why does it have to be you?" It was a fair question, one that Sarah had been asking herself. The answer wasn't simple, but it had to do with something her father had taught her about human nature. "Humans are pack animals," she said slowly, working through her thoughts. "We evolved to protect our group, our tribe, our family. But somewhere along the way, we developed the ability to extend that protection to anyone we consider ours. And I guess I consider everyone who can't protect themselves to be mine." Zara was quiet for a long moment. "Is that why humans are so good at war? Because you see everyone as either family or threat?" "Maybe," Sarah admitted. "But it's also why we're good at peace. When we decide someone is family, we'll do anything to protect them." Their conversation was interrupted by Sarah's communicator chiming with an incoming message. She glanced at the display and frowned. "What is it?" Zara asked. "Message from Admiral Keshtar," Sarah said, reading the text. "He wants to meet with me again." The Admiral was waiting in the same conference room where Sarah had faced the tribunal weeks earlier. But this time, they were alone. He gestured for her to sit across from him at the polished metal table. "Miss Chen," he began formally. "I've been monitoring your activities since our last meeting." Sarah kept her expression neutral. "Yes, sir. You've intervened in 7 separate bullying incidents, resolved 3 cases of academic theft, and somehow convinced the Tarkhan trade delegation to stop sexually harassing the service staff. They just needed the situation explained to them in terms they could understand, sir." The Admiral's crest fluttered. Bai explained. "You mean you threatened to introduce them to human concepts of personal combat?" "I provided them with cultural context about human protective instincts." "Yes, sir. I see." The Admiral leaned back in his chair. "Miss Chen, what you've accomplished in just 3 weeks is remarkable. You've effectively become this station's unofficial ombudsman for cases that fall through official cracks." I just help where I can, sir. Yes, you do. And that's exactly why I'm here. The Admiral leaned forward, his expression serious. The Galactic Council has been watching your activities with great interest. They've asked me to make you an offer. Sarah waited. They want to create a new position, the Admiral continued. A roving advocate for students across the galactic education system. Someone who can investigate complaints, mediate disputes, and resolve issues that local authorities can't or won't handle. The offer was intriguing but also concerning. What would that involve, sir? Travel to different stations and colonies, working with various species, dealing with complex cultural and political situations. It would be dangerous work not everyone appreciates outside interference. You'd have official backing, but you'd often be working alone. Sarah considered the implications. It was essentially what she'd been doing anyway, but on a galactic scale and with official authority. Why me, sir? I'm sure there are more qualified candidates. Are there? The Admiral asked. Miss Chen, in my experience, most species approach conflict resolution through negotiation, mediation, or legal processes. When those methods fail, they generally accept the status quo rather than risk confrontation. He stood and walked to the viewport, looking out at the stars beyond the station. Humans are different, he continued. When you see injustice, you don't accept it. You research the problem, develop a solution, and implement it regardless of personal risk. That's not necessarily a good thing, sir. Isn't it? The Admiral turned back to her. The Korthak brothers had been terrorizing students for years, before you arrived. The Tarkhan delegation had been harassing staff for months. The academic theft that Click Vess reported to you? It's been going on for over a year. Sarah frowned. Local authorities couldn't handle these situations. Local authorities chose not to handle them, the Admiral corrected. Political considerations, cultural sensitivities, economic pressures, there are always reasons why inconvenient problems get ignored. He returned to his seat and met her eyes directly. What you've shown, Miss Chen, is that humans have a unique ability to cut through all of that and focus on what's actually right. You don't care if the bullies have political connections. You don't care if intervening might cause diplomatic complications. You see someone being hurt, and you stop it. Sometimes that causes more problems than it solves. Sometimes, the Admiral agreed. But the alternative is allowing evil to flourish unopposed, and in my experience, that leads to much worse problems. Sarah was quiet for several minutes, thinking through the implications of what he was offering. It would mean leaving Kepler Station, leaving Zara and her father, and the life she was building here. But it would also mean helping beings across the galaxy who had no one else to turn to. If I accepted, she said slowly, what kind of authority would I have? Full investigative powers, diplomatic immunity, access to galactic defense resources when necessary. You'd report directly to the Council, with oversight from my office. And if I decided someone needed to have their face shattered? The Admiral smiled grimly. That would depend entirely on the circumstances. The Council understands that sometimes traditional diplomacy is insufficient. Sarah nodded slowly. The offer was tempting, but she wasn't ready to leave yet. There was still work to do on Kepler Station. Sir, she said finally, I appreciate the offer, but I'd like to stay here a while longer. There are still problems that need solving. I expected you'd say that, the Admiral said. He stood to leave, then paused at the door. Miss Chen, he said, there's something you should know. Since word of your actions spread, we've received reports from across the galaxy. Bullying incidents are down 17% system-wide. Academic theft has dropped 12%. Even harassment complaints are falling. Sarah looked puzzled. How is that possible? Because word has gotten out that humans don't tolerate that kind of behavior. And nobody wants to risk having a human girl show up to explain the situation to them. After the Admiral left, Sarah sat alone in the conference room for a long time, processing what she'd learned. Her actions had ripple effects she'd never considered. The story of one human girl standing up to bullies had somehow spread across known space, changing behavior on worlds she'd never heard of. It was a heavy responsibility. When she finally returned to her quarters, she found her father waiting with a concerned expression. "Admiral Keshtar briefed me on his offer," Michael said. "What are you thinking?" Sarah told him about her conversation, about the galactic implications of her actions, about the position she'd been offered. "It sounds like exactly the kind of work you're suited for," her father said carefully. "But it also sounds dangerous." "Everything worthwhile is dangerous, Dad. You taught me that." Michael smiled sadly. "I did, didn't I? Your mother always said I'd raise you to be too independent for your own good." They talked late into the night about duty, responsibility, and the price of standing up for what was right. By the time Sarah went to sleep, she'd made her decision. She would stay on Kepler Station for now, continuing to learn and grow and help where she could. But eventually, when the time was right, she would accept the Admiral's offer. The galaxy was full of beings who couldn't protect themselves, who needed someone to stand between them and those who would hurt them. Humans had earned their place among the stars through determination, ingenuity, and an unwillingness to accept injustice. Sarah was proud to carry that tradition forward. The next morning, she found Zara waiting for her in their usual spot in the corridor. The aviary girl's wings were spread wide, catching the artificial sunlight in patterns of breathtaking beauty. "Good morning, Sarah," Zara said with a smile that would have been impossible 3 weeks earlier. "Morning," Sarah replied. "Ready for another day? With you watching over everyone?" "I think we all are." As they walked to class together, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since that first morning when she'd watched the Korthak brothers break Zara's wings. The station felt different now, safer, more hopeful, more just. But she also knew there were other stations, other worlds, other beings who still lived in fear. Someday, she would go to them too. Because that's what humans did. They protected those who couldn't protect themselves, no matter the cost. And sometimes, they shattered a few faces along the way.